Bad Bee. Title: Bad Bee. Saturday, May 18, 2025. The sun beat down on the vast, golden fields, a searing promise of a bountiful, brutal summer. Hugo, 37 years old, wiped sweat from his brow, the acrid scent of smoke stinging his nostrils. Beside him, Matt, 5 years his junior, grunted as another beehive crashed to the earth, splintering wood and sending a furious cloud of insects into the air. Get Matt. None escapes, Hugo yelled over the crackle of burning straw. Their profession was a grim one, driven by the insatiable maw of profit. Across the country, farmers like Hugo and Matt were engaged in a systematic war against the very creatures that pollinated their crops. Hives, once revered symbols of nature's industriousness, were now mere commodities. Destroy them, sell the salvaged honey and wax, clear the land for more profitable, less bee-dependent harvests. It was a dirty business, but it paid. Today, however, would be different. Today, a forgotten bee would rewrite Hugo's fate in honey and venom. As the smoke cleared, Hugo leaned against his beat-up truck, reaching for the battered ceramic mug he always brought to the fields. He called it his elixir cup. Inside, a murky, brownish liquid swirled, a potent brew of field herbs, some he couldn't even name, mixed with the raw, golden honey they'd plundered from the last hive. Hugo believed in its power. He'd always felt a strange connection to the land, a hunger for something more, and these concoctions, he was convinced, opened a door to it. He swore the honey, mixed with the earth's secrets, gave him an edge, a peculiar strength. But he hadn't seen the lone survivor. A tiny, disoriented worker bee, driven mad by the smoke and destruction of its home, spiraled erratically. It found the opening of Hugo's mug, mistaking the sweet, herbal aroma for a sanctuary, a desperate, final resting place. With a soft plink, it vanished beneath the murky surface. Hugo, lost in thought about the next field to plunder, took a long, deep swig, barely tasting the unusual bitterness beneath the familiar sweetness. He swallowed the strange concoction, the weird ingredients, the honey, and the desperate bee, all sliding down his throat. He felt a faint, fleeting prickle, like a tiny burr catching in his esophagus, then nothing. He wiped his mouth, oblivious to the insidious change that had just begun. The next morning, Hugo awoke with a strange sensation, a deep, persistent vibration in his gut. It wasn't indigestion, nor was it hunger. It was alive. He sat up, his vision blurring for a moment, the room seeming to hum around him. He pressed a hand to his stomach, and gasped. Beneath his skin, his abdomen was distended, subtly at first, then undeniably so. A faint, intricate pattern seemed to emerge, like honeycomb, a geometric lattice flexing and undulating. He heard a faint buzzing sound, not from outside, but from within him. Panic seized him, his fingers clawing at his shirt, tearing it open. What he saw made him retch. His belly was no longer skin and muscle. It was a living, breathing beehive, a grotesque organic structure of waxy cells, pulsating gently. And inside, a chaotic, golden swarm of bees, thousands of them, moving with feverish energy. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. This wasn't possible. He looked in the mirror, his eyes wide with a horrifying understanding. The mixed ingredients, the honey, the bee, it all flooded back. The sting, the strange taste. He had sought power, and he had found it, but not in the way he'd ever imagined. He wasn't a man anymore. He was something else. A human bee. A honeyman. He touched his throat, a peculiar vibration beginning to resonate. He let out a low, guttural sound, a deep, resonant hum. And then, from deep within his belly, a low thrumming answered. A crack appeared in the waxy surface of his abdomen, a dark aperture, and a stream of buzzing, angry bees poured forth. They circled him, a living halo of fury, then, as he held the hum, they settled, hovering, awaiting his command. A cold, calculating smile spread across Hugo's face. He had found his power. His first target was a minor one, a small town councilman who had blocked one of their land deals. Hugo knew the man lived alone, a creature of predictable habit. He waited until nightfall, the air thick with the promise of rain. He approached the house like a phantom, the swarm a silent, invisible cloak around him. Once he was close, Hugo released another low hum, a primal, ancient sound that vibrated not just in his throat, but through the very bones of the world. The bees erupted from his belly, a black cloud of malice. They streamed through an open window, a dark torrent of rage. A scream, high-pitched and terrified, ripped through the night, followed by another, then a gurgling silence. Hugo waited, listening to the frantic buzzing diminish. When it was quiet, he hummed again, a soft, inviting melody. The bees returned, a torrent of tiny bodies, disappearing back into the fleshy hive within him. He slipped inside the house. The councilman lay on the floor, his face and body swollen, purple welts rising like grotesque constellations. Honey, fresh and thick, dripped from the ceiling, from the seams around the windows, from every crack and crevice, leaving a sticky, golden trail. This was his signature, the calling card of the honeyman. He searched the house, finding a modest stash of cash in a desk drawer. He pocketed it, the thrill of both power and plunder intoxicating. This was a gift. The bees did his bidding, killed his enemies, and then, as a bonus, he got paid for it. The authorities were baffled. Honey dripping from a murder scene. No forced entry, no obvious weapon. Just a man, stung to death, and the inexplicable, sweet, golden residue. They called it, the Honey Murders, a morbid joke that sent shivers down the spine of the town. Matt found Hugo a few weeks later, looking unusually robust, a strange glint in his eye. He was no longer covered in the grime of the fields, but dressed in surprisingly clean clothes. "What's with you, Hugo? You look like you just won the lottery," Matt joked, pouring 2 beers. Hugo leaned in, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Better than the lottery, Matt. Much, much better." He told Matt everything, the whole unbelievable story. The bee, the ingredients, the hive in his belly, the humming, the power. He even gave Matt a quick, terrifying demonstration, a controlled release of a handful of bees from his shirt, which swarmed around them before returning to their fleshy prison. Matt recoiled, pale and speechless. You're a monster, Hugo," Matt stammered, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "No, Matt," Hugo corrected, his voice laced with a dark pride. "I am a god, and you, my friend, can be my apostle. We'll cleanse this rotten world, one sting at a time. Think of it, Matt. No more back-breaking labor. No more fighting for scraps. We take what we want, kill who we please. You and me. What do you say?" Matt, always the follower, the weaker will, eventually succumbed. The idea of power, of striking back at a world that had always seemed to hold them down, was too tempting. Soon, Matt was driving Hugo from town to town, pointing out targets, people who had wronged them, rival farmers, anyone Hugo deemed deserving of the bees' wrath. The body count rose. The honey murders spread. The authorities were in a frenzy, yet utterly clueless. They had no leads, only the recurring, macabre signature of honey. Hugo, now openly calling himself the honeyman, reveled in the chaos. The honeyman's ambition grew as vast as the fields they once destroyed. "Matt," Hugo declared one evening, his eyes gleaming with a mad fervor, "it's time we made a real statement. We've been playing small fry. It's time to go for the king." "The king?" Matt asked, a knot forming in his stomach. "President Tanvir," Hugo pronounced, his voice dripping with venom. 50-year-old hypocrite. Talks about sustainable farming, while lining his pockets with corporate deals. He's the head of the snake, Matt. Take him out, and the whole rotten system will crumble. Matt felt a cold dread settle over him. Killing farmers, loan sharks, even a corrupt councilman. That was one thing. But the president. This was madness. This was going too far. His conscience, long buried under the thrill of the shared atrocities, finally clawed its way to the surface. Hugo, no, Matt whispered, horrified. That's insane. We can't. They'll hunt us down. There'll be no hiding. Hugo simply laughed, a dry, rasping sound. They can't hunt what they can't find, Matt. They can't find what they don't understand. We're untouchable. Unless, his eyes narrowed, unless someone betrays us. That look, that subtle glint of threat, solidified Matt's decision. He spent a sleepless night, the faces of their victims flashing before his eyes, the buzzing of Hugo's belly a phantom echo in his mind. He couldn't be a part of this. He couldn't let Hugo kill the president. The next morning, Matt walked into the nearest police station, his face ashen. He spilled everything, the unbelievable truth of Hugo, the honeyman, the living beehive, the plan to assassinate President Tanvir. The police, initially skeptical, listened with growing alarm as Matt detailed the impossible crimes, the dripping honey, the humming sound, the impossible strength. They recorded his statement, connecting the dots that Matt provided, realizing with dawning horror that they might finally have their lunatic, their monster. Hugo saw it on the news that evening. A grainy sketch of Matt's face, a breathless report about a credible threat to President Tanvir, implicating a person of interest, known only as the honeyman. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Matt, his friend, his accomplice, he'd gone to the authorities. Fury, cold and absolute, consumed him. He found Matt 2 days later, sitting at a small outdoor table of a quiet roadside restaurant, sipping a hot drink, a desperate attempt at normalcy. Matt looked tired, haunted. He hadn't seen Hugo. Hugo approached slowly, a deep, resonant hum building in his throat. Matt stiffened, his head snapping up, his eyes widening in terror when he saw Hugo's face, contorted with rage. You betrayed me, Matt, Hugo hissed, the hum now a roaring vibration. Hugo, please. It was too much. The president, you can't. But Hugo offered no mercy. With a guttural roar, he tore open his shirt. The hive in his belly pulsed, a furious, golden light. A torrent of bees, black and furious, erupted from his abdomen, a living storm. Matt screamed, knocking over his chair as he tried to flee, but the swarm was too fast. It enveloped him, a living shroud. His screams were short-lived, replaced by choking gasps. Passersby screamed, scattering in horror, witnessing the impossible. Within moments, Matt stumbled, then collapsed, his body already swelling, covered in 1,000 angry stings. Honey, this time stained with Matt's blood, began to weep from his eyes, his mouth, his ears, a final, sickening transformation. The bees returned, humming a victorious, bloodthirsty song as they flowed back into Hugo's belly. Hugo stood over Matt's swollen corpse, breathing heavily, no remorse in his eyes, only a chilling satisfaction. Everyone who had doubted him, everyone who had stood against him, would fall. The revelation of Matt's death, witnessed by dozens, finally broke the seal of disbelief. The honeyman was real. The monster was loose. The authorities, armed with Matt's detailed confession and the eyewitness accounts, galvanized. They knew Hugo's methods, his weaknesses, and his reliance on specific locations for his attacks. They set a trap. They chose a secluded path leading through a small copse of trees, a known shortcut Hugo used to access a cluster of isolated homes. High above, nestled in the thick branches of an ancient oak, they rigged a heavy-duty net, camouflaged and ready. Hugo, fueled by a terrifying blend of vengeance and grandiosity, walked into it, oblivious. He was on his way to another target, a local journalist who had dared to print Matt's story, now a public enemy in the honeyman's eyes. As he passed under the oak, a familiar hum building in his throat, ready to unleash his deadly swarm, a sudden, sharp tug sent him sprawling upwards. The net dropped, heavy and strong, ensnaring him completely. He thrashed, his legs kicking uselessly as he was hoisted, upside down, by a hidden winch. He hung suspended from the tree, tangled in the coarse mesh, his rage turning to desperate fear. He tried to hum, to call his bees, but the inverted position, the constriction of the net, choked the sound in his throat. The hive in his belly, distressed and disoriented, began to leak. Warm, sticky honey, thick with the scent of pollen and fear, started to drip, slowly at first, then in thick rivulets, through the gaps of the net. The bees, confused by the sudden change in their host, by the flowing nectar that was no longer contained, began to emerge, not in a controlled swarm, but in a frantic, panicked outpouring. They swarmed out, thousands upon thousands, no longer obedient, no longer commanded. They were disoriented, angry, and the primary instinct was self-preservation, and to sting the source of the distress. Hugo screamed, a raw, primal sound of agony. The bees, his power, his weapon, turned on him. They covered his body, stinging relentlessly, mistaking him for a threat, a collapsing structure, an enemy. He thrashed, his body convulsing, the venom flooding his system. The honey dripped, his lifeblood, his power, flowing away from him, an offering to the earth. His screams died down to gurgles, then a horrifying, buzzing silence. The net held him, a grotesque, honey-coated chrysalis, his face bloated and unrecognizable. When the authorities cautiously approached, the bees had returned to the empty, flaccid hive in his belly, or scattered into the surrounding woods, leaving behind only the sticky, sweet evidence of their final, terrible loyalty. The honeyman was dead. The town, for the first time in months, could breathe. The horrific, buzzing nightmare was over. The honey stopped dripping, the fear began to recede, and slowly, painstakingly, life returned to normal. The fields, once again, were just fields, and bees, for a time, were simply bees. The end. Story by Kayode E.